It's the exact same pathway that clears estrogen that also clears histamine. So if you're having a hard time clearing estrogen, now you're also having a hard time clearing that histamine. And in addition to this, estrogen itself has the potential of triggering your mast cells to dump more histamine.
I've heard this vicious cycle thing.
Yeah. And then on top of that, and so the progesterone is the one that starts to slow down production as we shift into menopause. Well, progesterone is kind of like the brakes on histamine release. So for somebody who has this persistent histamine issue that's gone on and kind of gotten more not severe, but has ramped up as you are coming towards perimenopause and menopause, then you need to start looking at, well, how are your progesterone levels? And what can we do to support that progesterone hormone in order to naturally put in those brakes?
Welcome to the Menopause Mindset Podcast with me, your host, Sally Garozzo. I'm an award-winning rapid transformational therapist, a menopause mindset coach, and the founder of the Sleep Superpower Academy. So this is the place to be to get some answers and to feel supported along this very bumpy journey. It's my mission to help peri to postmenopausal women go from feeling anxious, alone and confused to feeling positive, informed and connected. Not only about their health, but about their relationship well-being and their career fulfillment too. So even though you might be at your wit's end right now, your menopause and your whole midlife transition has the power to be so transformative that it can actually turn out to be one of the best times in your life. So thank you so much for spending the next part of your day with me. Now let's dive in. So my guest today is a holistic nutrition practitioner specializing in the world of histamine and histamine intolerance. She works alongside her business partner, and the two of them run a fantastic community called Histamine Haven. And we're going to hear from Tracy later on in the year. So through her uplifting and informative workshops, talks and one-on-one consults, my guest helps you to make your kitchen your number one ally in maintaining robust health. Her work focuses on helping get at the root of chronic health concerns and is steeped in the power of good food plus real food choices while keeping it all totally practical, manageable and doable. So Luka Symons, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Sally. This is very exciting. This is my most favorite topic.
Well, I am super excited and honored to be talking to you about histamine because you are you an expert on histamine? Do you call yourself an expert?
Yeah, I guess we could. I personally struggle with it. So heck yeah, I know it intimately. And I also, the majority of the clients that I work with actually have some kind of histamine involvement. And if they don't, they're still like, it's all good work anyway. But yeah, the majority of people I work with are histamine. And then my colleague Tracy and I also run Histamine Haven, where we're doing a lot of work to clarify and help empower people to understand when histamine is part of the picture, whether it's histamine intolerance or something called mast cell activation syndrome or mast cell activation disorders. There's a whole gamut of them.
Mast cell activation. Okay, that's a new one on me. So histamine it's been lightly on my radar. And then when I was reading a book, Period Power by Maisie Hill, I dove deeper into it and saw how it might be affecting my post-nasal drip in the middle of the night, waking up with that choking on your own mucus, and then migraines. And then I think one of you said, dizziness can be caused by histamine intolerance as well. So I was like, well, I've definitely been dizzy for the last few years. So, and then when I looked at the list of foods that activate this histamine reaction, I was very disappointed because there are foods on there that you think are healthy, like fermented foods and smoked salmon and aged cheese and things like that you don't think are healthy, but it's disappointing because they're the types of foods that you love, and dark chocolate and things like that. So we're going to get into all of that. But what I want to know from you, Luka, is what was that light bulb moment for you? When did you realize, oh my God, it's histamine?
I cried and I lost a pair of pants in this discovery. So I had, my little one was, my daughter's now 17, but when she was well, 4, maybe 3 or 4, I was just starting to understand the role that food can play. I hadn't gone to nutrition school yet. And I took her to her dance class. But before that, somebody had said, oh, you should look into the Weston Price Foundation. They talk about bone broths. It's traditional food. It's ancestral knowledge of how people have prepared food in all cultures around the globe traditionally, and how far we veered away from it and how that's impacting our health. So I started to make the bone broth, and I made that 72-hour bubbling turkey thing on the stovetop that then the bones disintegrate. Made a beautiful vermicelli soup out of it. Eliza, my kiddo, and I both had a Slurpee bowl and noodles. We went to her dance class, and in the dance class, there was an urgent need to make it to the bathroom. Didn't even know if I'd make it, even if I squeezed my cheeks, but I did. I lost my entire innards in 1.2 seconds on the toilet, made it in time. Washed my hands, about to get back on, washed my hands again. And then I thought, it's been about 10 minutes. I should probably go back out. I open the door and there's a mum on the ground, and I hear this voice, help. And I think, that's a very feeble sounding voice. Oh, that's mine. And I passed out, totally passed out on the floor, and had episode number 3. They had to recarpet that floor. I lost my dignity, my pants, and so much more on that carpet. And it was there where I thought, geez, all of these things that people always talk about as the healthy thing, the fermented foods, the bone broth, the avocado, like all of these foods I was trying to do, and I would just not react the way that you would think you're supposed to react to these things. A couple of years later, after I finished my nutrition degree, I'm doing a course in how to prepare for the GAPS protocol, which is a gut and psychology syndrome. It's a gut healing and gut mending protocol. And it starts off with bone broth. And I was like, oh, here we go again. Hand up. And I said, I can't, I don't want to hear about bone broth anymore. Somebody said you should look into histamine and do a short cook so it's lower in histamine. That was the first time I heard the word histamine. And it was that moment of, what now? There could be something. And then when I got back home after the weekend in Colorado, I just sat and immersed myself and realized all of those pieces that we talked about in nutrition school, all of the stuff that's out in the health and wellness industry of do this for reducing inflammation, do an anti-inflammatory diet, eat these foods, prioritize these, take this out. They had made me a mess. They had made me a mess and made my symptoms even worse. And I had the migraines. I had the period troubles. Like I would need 2 days off every month when my cycle would start. I had hives and eczema, and I had anxiety disorder. There were so many other little things that at the age of 42, when I look back, I started to put together, that was histamine. That was histamine. There was histamine involvement there and there and there. And while I don't have a diagnosis, I know the common thread to all of these things. When I looked back from the age of 42, that I realized, I think I've had histamine issues my entire life. Is it histamine intolerance? Is it a mast cell involvement? I have no idea. Part of me actually, I'm the kind of person where I don't necessarily need to know. I really just want to feel better every day and know what I can do so that I don't lose my pants ever again, so that I don't have the flare-ups of eczema. So that's what opened the door. And from there, that was about 2014, started to really immerse myself into it. And that's what brings me to today. My colleague Tracy, who also struggles with histamine stuff, we've put together this whole Histamine Haven community and lots of supports to put in place, because that's what happens when you first realize there's a histamine piece. It is so overwhelming, and you go down the rabbit hole, and it's terrifying, and everyone has different ideas, different solutions. And you have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, because it's quite a limiting diet, isn't it? When you look at what you can't eat or what triggers a histamine response in the body, things like spinach, avocado, strawberries, and you think, well, they're healthy foods. And how the heck am I going to eliminate these things from a healthy diet? But I guess there are ways around it, and we're going to get into all of this. I'm curious to know the link between histamine and anxiety.
There is a histamine involvement when anxiety is persistent and shows up. There's a histamine piece to the picture, has to do with actually the stress response and that whole HPA axis. So the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. And in the stress response, you trigger the release of certain types of compounds in your nervous system. And part of what gets released, it triggers these cells of your immune system called mast cells, and it triggers them to release some of their 200 plus compounds they've got. One of those compounds is histamine.
Right.
So as part of the stress response, the more you've triggered that stress response in the body, the more you now have the potential of releasing a little bit more histamine. And now they're tying a link to anxiety and having a histamine piece to the picture. So yeah, and when that shows up, it's been going on for a while and it's sort of built up for quite some time.
Okay. So you mentioned mast cells. Can you explain a little bit more about what mast cells are in the body? If you
Do you
can.
have 17 hours?
Right. I've heard of T cells and B cells.
Yeah.
I know they're... Go on.
Yeah, well, so mast cells are marvelous. I'm going to start by saying they are the oldest part of your immune system. They were the first part of the immune system to be developed. They're actually part of like the first animal things, cells that showed up. Mast cells was one of the first cells to develop. And that's what eventually built our innate immune system. And then mast cells were kind of your defense mechanism. They're sort of your sentinel, really. So they are there to protect you against outside invaders and to help keep you well. So part of their work is in taking down viruses, taking down bacteria, and keeping you safe. They have the potential of dumping more than 200, I'm sure, 200 different, they call them chemical mediators. So there's different kinds of compounds they release when they are activated. So activated means they're poked and prodded. Something's triggering the mast cell to go, and it opens up and it dumps a bunch of stuff. That's the sound it makes.
I like that.
I've listened to, no, I'm kidding. But the mast cells then release these compounds. One of those compounds is histamine. Oh. And so when histamine is released, I really see it as this marvelous, my body's protecting me kind of mechanism. And it's so like extrapolate that to when I work with clients, like you see it that people who have a histamine thing are people who want to get better, are people who don't necessarily get the answers, but they keep looking for the answers until they find it. And they are people who are really invested in keeping well. And so it's this ancient piece that I feel we're coming at this current time, at this paradigm when we're, at this current time in history. I feel like it's tying the old and helping bring the old in to help us make our way through the world now as it is. Mm-hmm. So mast cells are just your protective detail that helps keep you well. And histamine is just one of those compounds that your mast cells release. Histamine have the potential of making things happen as well. Like, when you get knifed by your cat, right? When she scratches you with her claws, you'll have histamine released by your immune system, your mast cells in that area. They'll be triggered by the stress response, the acute injury response. And the histamine that's released helps dilate your blood vessels so that your blood and your immune system through that blood can then wash through the area and clean up. So you don't get infected, so that you are alive. Like it is always the body protecting herself. Mm-hmm. So take that one step further. And I really think that when mast cells or histamine or both are involved, it is a body that does not feel safe. So the work now becomes creating that safe haven, right? And working at those other pieces. Like food is just a small piece of it. There's so much more to do, or there's an invitation to dive. It's not a 2-week program. It's not a 2-week project. Like it's an invitation to shift things and to see, how come my body doesn't feel safe? Let's do a bit of exploring and identify those root pieces. The food is just a small piece of it, right? A low histamine diet doesn't fix a histamine issue. You got to figure out why histamine is an issue, address those root pieces. The diet certainly helps. I'm not going to lie. Like it's a really great tool, but it is not the be all and end all, not in my eyes.
So that's so interesting that you've said about the safety, because it seems like that the high histamine or the histamine intolerance is a consequence of a body that is on high alert all the time.
Ding, ding, ding. Yes, exactly. And that's due to, there can be so many different contributing factors to that. For sure, there is, if your gut is not well, if you have dysbiosis or an imbalance in your microbiome, if you have leaky gut or permeability at the intestinal lining, that's the other way to call it. If your adrenals have worked really hard for a really long time, and this is where perimenopause and menopause comes into play. because as your hormone production in the ovaries starts to wane as you are moving into menopause, the work that the ovaries were doing now goes to the adrenals. So now you're asking the adrenals, who worked hard till the age of, whenever, 42, 48, 51, whatever age you're shifting into, they now have an extra to do on their list. So now you're taxing the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. You're triggering the stress response, which now potentiates your mast cells to release more histamine. And not to add insult to injury, but histamine itself, when it's released by a mast cell, can attach to any other mast cell and trigger that mast cell to release even more histamine.
Wow.
Kind of like a snowball, but it is meant to be that protective barrier. So red alert, guys, everybody on the defense, let's go. We're in danger territory kind of thing. So we got to calm the body. Sometimes
and calm the mind.
Oh God, 1,000,000%.
HPA axis, because it starts on the hypothalamus, doesn't it?
It does, which also can trigger things on your nervous system side, on the psychoneuroimmunology connection. So psycho, right, the emotional health of your body, the neuro, which is the nerve cells, and then your immune system. Nerve cells and mast cells talk to each other. Right. Nerve cells will ask mast cells to tell them what's going on. And as they do, they sort of up each other and they potentiate each other, right? So the more you trigger that stress response, the more you're now sensitized, the less stimulus it takes to bring on a reaction kind of thing. So it's one of these things of, we gotta work on the calming of the mind. We gotta work on calming of the body. We got to work on what stressors are in the body that are driving that histamine release from your mast cells. And we need to look at what's happening at the gut level. We also, there's like 18 points. Then we need to also look at how well your body can clear histamine, because I want to make it clear. I know I'm going into so much detail. When histamine is an issue, we make histamine, we use it, we need it. We're supposed to have it. But when we're done with it, we're supposed to break it down and move it out.
Gotcha.
So when there happens to be a histamine issue for somebody, you need to start looking at, okay, why do you have so much? Why do you have more coming in than you're able to clear? What's happening with the clearance? Are you able to break it down? Is there a genetic component to that? Is there something that is not working well? Are you not methylating properly is one of those processes we look at the liver and so many other little pieces. So it's not a straightforward, eat this diet, you're good, bye.
Is that why there's a link between estrogen dominance and histamine? Because when people are estrogen dominant, they're not methylating, they're not clearing, is it deconjugating their estrogen in the liver and it recirculates back into the body? Is it a similar thing that's going on with histamine if we're not clearing it out?
It's the exact same pathway that clears estrogen that also clears histamine. So if you're having a hard time clearing estrogen, now you're also having a hard time clearing that histamine. And in addition to this, estrogen itself, don't cry, has the potential of triggering your mast cells to dump more histamine.
I've heard this vicious cycle thing.
Yeah. And then on top of that, progesterone, right? So there's estrogen and progesterone is kind of the cycle that female identified people or female bodies will go through. And so the progesterone is the one that starts to slow down production as we shift into menopause. Well, progesterone is kind of like the brakes on histamine release. So for somebody who has this persistent histamine issue that's gone on and kind of gotten more not severe, but has ramped up as you are coming towards perimenopause and menopause, then you need to start looking at, well, how are your progesterone levels? And what can we do to support that progesterone hormone in order to naturally put in those brakes? Of course, progesterone is supposed to wane as you move into menopause. Then that's the DHEA component, which your adrenals will make. So DHEA, in a very similar fashion, has the potential of slowing that down. So yeah, it's again about reducing stress, which is a really small feat. No, it's not.
It's flipping hard.
I know.
Especially in this world we live in. I wanted to ask you, I've come across a supplement called DOA or DAO, dihydroxy something enzyme, which our capacity to produce that diminishes as we go through menopause. Is that right?
Potentially. So it's DAO, you're correct, diamine oxidase. So diamine oxidase is one of those enzymes that we're supposed to make. There's two in the body that break down histamine. Yes. So think of them as scissors. Once histamine's been used, these guys come in, they break it down, and then they move it out. So DAO is one of those enzymes, and you make that one at the intestinal lining. Your ability to make it depends on the health of your gut lining. Also depends on genetics. And that's some of that stuff. Some of it is what you've inherited for sure. There's also the epigenetics piece of that, like how well are those genes turned on? Is there potential of turning those off? And there's ways to support that as well. But really optimizing the ability to make this enzyme is one of those pieces, especially if you're the person who has histamine intolerance. It's also very good for mast cell people, because the more you can reduce the histamine in the body, the more you can reduce what's triggering your mast cells to dump more histamine. So that DAO enzyme breaks down any histamine coming in through your intestinal lining. Okay. And the histamine coming in through your intestinal lining is for sure foods. That's very clear. But if you have any type of imbalance in your microbiome, if I say microbiome, will your crew know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Okay. We've spoken about it before.
Yeah. Okay. So that microbiome, the bacteria, fungi, yeast that are living in your guts, if you have an imbalance, there are certain strains that produce histamine as a byproduct. And I don't remember what the exact number is, but it's the majority of your mast cells are actually in your intestinal lining. And so if you have this increase of histamine, whether you're eating it, whether you can't make that enzyme to break it down, or the bacteria in your gut are producing it, now you're making way more than you can move out. Mm. So it becomes that we call it the hi-ho principle. So histamine in has to equal histamine out. And the management of that is what we work towards. So we work towards reducing the histamine coming in, and we improve how well you can move those histamines out to break them down. And that's where the majority of the work lies, is in prioritizing and maximizing how well you can break things down. Now, that DAO enzyme you're mentioning, we are supposed to make it, but there's some foods that have it.
Right.
So this is where food can be such a great help in this. Like pea sprouts. Pea sprouts naturally have that DAO enzyme in them. That's easy to chop. I know here where I am in the Rocky Mountains in Alberta, we have a lot of small producers making pea sprouts, pea shoots, same thing, not the pea itself at the bottom, but the sprout coming off. In those day 3 to day 10 of growth from the seed, when it started germinating, the DAO count is really high. So you just mince that and use it as a condiment on top of all of your meals, and you're providing your body with those enzymes to help reduce the histamine coming in. So it's those small little pieces you could start putting in place to help yourself get through the histamine coming into your system and supporting it to best move it out.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So, do you ever advise anyone to take DAO supplements? Do you believe they work, or is it much better because if they're made in the gut, it's sometimes hard for me to understand how a supplement that's got to go through your digestive system isn't going to get broken down by your stomach acid and just sort of disintegrated.
You ask all the same questions I think about. Yeah, right? That's the question. Some people do see benefits from it. Some people don't. So it's really an individual piece. I will do what I can to support you naturally being able to make that enzyme. Our work is also in through pea shoots. It's just food. So it should help. There's a lot of other foods that help break down histamines as well. But the DAO supplement, you have to start looking too. If there's any kind of excipients or extra stuff added into the supplement itself, depending on what you've got going on and what your biochemistry is, do you react to some of those other compounds in there? So people who have mast cell issues, they sometimes will react to just a little bit of stimulus, whereas everybody else would take a lot for them to trigger a response. Somebody who has a mast cell piece to the picture, they might react to the DAO enzyme, to the ones from the pills that they're taking. So that's where you start to introduce pea sprouts. Well, I had somebody who couldn't handle pea sprouts and it brought a reaction into her mouth. So she can't rely on them. So it's really quite an individual thing. It's something for sure that when we talk to clients, we talk about, okay, give it a shot, try it out, see how it is. And did you see a reduction in your symptoms in the hours following that meal? And we would look to that perhaps as a way to be that helper, you know, when you're going out, because you want to go out and celebrate with your colleagues for somebody's 20th anniversary of being at the job. Does anybody stay 20 years in their job anymore? Or, you know, when you're going to your granddaughter's birthday, or, you know, when there's a celebration of sorts, this allows people to be able to still participate and help mitigate how they'll feel afterwards. So instead of feeling like, geez, I'm going to have to take 3 days off after the celebration, then maybe their symptoms will not come and show up as much as they would had they not taken the supplement.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's backtrack a little bit. I feel like we should have perhaps started with this, but we got carried away. How does somebody know if they have a histamine issue? What are some of the symptoms going on? Yeah, I mean,
I laugh only because it's not fair to laugh. Histamine has a potential of activating every single cell of the body. So this means that histamine issues can show up anywhere in the body. Okay. So I'll go through some of the more main ones or the more common ones that you might find. And then I'll point to some even weird ones that I've seen, or what, not weird. They are perfectly natural and normal body response to protect, but they would not necessarily be as common. So the common ones would be hives. And I want to be clear, I'm not diagnosing here, but that these could be indicators that there's something going on with histamine. So hives is one, eczema, psoriasis has some type of histamine or mast cell involvement. That's skin stuff. If we go to heart arrhythmia can have a histamine component to it. Anywhere you've got pain, so chest pain, first of all, please get that checked out by a medical team because you need to rule out heart attack, of course. But if they can't figure out and they say it's not a heart attack, if there's pain that's associated in the picture, that can certainly have a histamine involvement. And pain anywhere else, the chronic pain, typically chronic pain that will move around the body. There's also edema, fluid retention can have a histamine component to it. Migraines is probably one of the biggest ones. Acid reflux is another one. There's so many things like some of these chronic conditions like interstitial cystitis, which is pain associated with urination or your bladder. Interstitial cystitis and chronic pelvic pain syndrome, I think it's called. There's anywhere there's the word pain, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, like some of these big autoimmune conditions, they will have some piece of mast cell involvement. Especially because of that autoimmune piece. You know, when you have an autoimmune condition, your immune system is ramped up and she's protecting you. And part of that ramping up is that sentinel showing up to protect you. So mast cells start to have that potential of contributing to the picture. Yeah. There's like so many. I wish I had my sheet in front of me. There's so many. We have a symptom.
Go on. Yeah. Sorry.
No, chest pain. Tell me about chest pain.
The chest pain one is really interesting because I have had a very intimate relationship with dark chocolate for about the last 10 years. And I love it. And it's like, for me, it's like wine. I'm a kind of a chocolate connoisseur. But I do find that if I eat it late at night, I get chest pains and I get like palpitations and that kind of... And I just put it down to it being a stimulant, really, and having sugar. I didn't put it down to histamine.
Or it could be all three.
Or it could be all three, right?
Yeah. Like it wouldn't. And how do you know? Well, you take it out for 3 days, see if you still get those pains and that palpitation. And then what you can do. So we have a recipe when you sign up for a newsletter for a white hot chocolate. So cocoa or cacao, either or. The powder is high histamine, the butter is not. So anything you make with just cocoa butter will not be high histamine. I mean, depending on the other ingredients in there, but we have a white hot chocolate recipe that we share. So then you bring in the white hot chocolate. Do you have the palpitations? Then you need to start looking at, would it be the sugar component or something else? But yeah, it could potentially have a histamine component. Dark chocolate, just a bar of dark chocolate would have a lot of histamine in it. The beans themselves are fermented. Anything fermented has the potential of being really high histamine.
Oh yeah, I didn't even realize that. Okay. Yeah, so interesting. I've pulled up your Histamine Haven symptom list.
Are you crying yet? You see how many there are? It's really overwhelming.
Yeah. So let's go. So brain and nervous system, headaches, migraine, dizziness, vertigo, anxiety, numbness, tingling, nerve pain, concentration, sleep difficulties, sensitivity to light, sound, smells. I mean, some of this is like menopausal symptoms.
Right?
Yeah. So how do you know which? I guess you don't.
I suppose I'm sure there could be, as a holistic nutrition person, I can't send anybody for testing. So to me, at that point, if somebody wants a really clear answer, then I would send them either to a functional medicine practitioner or to a naturopath in order to do the testing to figure out what could potentially be some of the contributing factors. I'll tell you, the work is the same. Whether it's histamine or you're having a hard time moving through menopause, the work is the same. We need to support the adrenals. Yeah. When you support the adrenals, now you're starting to reduce the stress response in the body. Now you're starting to reduce, of course, what's contributing to the menopausal symptoms, but you're also at the same time reducing what's potentially triggering your body to release histamine. Yeah. So you're reducing the amount of histamine coming in and you're creating that safety. So looking after the adrenals and looking after blood sugar balancing and balancing those hormones, prioritizing sleep, all of those pieces all are part of creating safety. But to tell somebody in menopause, just work on your sleep. Well, that's not going to do, what am I supposed to, like, if you can't sleep and someone tells you, just work on your sleep, that doesn't help. So when you start to address some of those histamine pieces, and histamine has a part to play in wakefulness. Histamine promotes wakefulness. It's a neurotransmitter that we need that helps us stay awake. So as we move into menopause, for some of the population that is struggling with sleep, that's one of the pieces to look into. Could it be that you are producing a little bit more histamine or releasing histamine as the day goes on? And is that what's potentially keeping you up? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm starting to cry as you keep saying.
I knew this is what happens. You start to realize histamine or mast cell and you're like, oh my God, I'm dying. No, you're not. Actually, the opposite. Look how marvelously your body is working to keep you alive and keep you well. Yeah. This is all from a position of protection.
I think I'm crying with interest more than crying with like, oh my God, this is terrible. It's like, when things start landing and you get those light bulb moments, I think that's what's happening here. I'm like, oh yes. And then I'm looking at some of the reproductive symptoms, extreme pain with periods, PMS, infertility, estrogen dominance, which is something we've spoken about. The digestive issues, nausea with or without vomiting, heartburn, acid reflux, especially in the middle of the night, things like that, diarrhea, abdominal pain, food allergies and sensitivities, and then muscles and joints, painful joints, painful muscles, and I guess as well, the after exercise, that inability to repair quickly might have something to do with histamine.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to go do a little bit of digging to figure that out. I'm sure in a roundabout way it does, because a system that can't do the repair very quickly is under a lot of stress, which would trigger that stress response, which then potentially sets you up to have histamine stuff. So yeah, probably in a roundabout way, I'm sure it is impacted by that.
And the twitches, because I've had those experiences of, in the middle of the night when the whole body just twitches and wakes you up. So that's interesting. Degenerative discs, which I've got. Hypermobility. I don't have that. But
that's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is the other way that's been known. So Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or EDS, has a mast cell involvement for sure.
What is that, the same as degenerative disc or hypermobility?
Hypermobility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And then you've said at the bottom, this list is not complete. This is not an exhaustive list. There are more. So, I mean, can you think of any of the other weird ones, or have I said them all?
Yeah, well, so if you understand that histamine plays a role in the movement of soft tissue. So your soft tissue would be what lines your uterus, what lines your intestinal tract, your bladder, for our male friends, for their reproductive parts, anything that pushes stuff through. So anything to do with ejaculation, with the moving out of poop or pee, like the moving out of fluids requires some type of action from smooth muscle tissue. That action is triggered by histamine. So anywhere there is that sort of involvement, there can be a hyper release or a hypo release. So a slowing down of it or an acceleration of it. So that's where some of the more unusual stuff that I've seen is hyper libido or hypolibido. May not necessarily be the first thing you think of histamine in that case, but it can be one of the ways that it shows up. Yeah, there's so many. Histamine just has, and mast cells, because they were one of those first pieces the immune system developed, they had this miraculous job of having to do everything. And here we are in an era, and the majority of people who are affected by this are female bodies. So at this point, you need to start wondering, there's an absolute hormonal piece to the picture that needs to be taken into consideration. And I think it's a clarion call. I think it's actually a clarion call right now to change our ways and to support female bodies, to do what we can to bring the village together, to build that community piece so that you're not having to do everything by yourself, so that your body has the potential to feel safe. What kinds of pieces can we put in place for bodies to feel safe?
Because that's the key. Like you said before, the treatment is the same, whether we're looking at menopause, whether we're looking at histamine intolerance, and other stress-related conditions as well. It's coming back to self. It's turning down that stress response. How can we get our needs met a little bit more? And I think all of us are trying to be, do, and have everything. The business, be the ultimate parent, be the ultimate, partner, have it all, really. And I don't think we can. I think we have to hand over to other people and let ourselves be helped or ask. And I think a lot of that plays into the treatment of these things and saying no. I recently had to say no to an engagement a couple of weeks ago because I wasn't feeling great and I knew I couldn't give as much as I wanted to give. And thankfully the group that I'm in was they're all wellness entrepreneurs. So I told the truth and I said, look, here's why I can't show up for you today. And it was nice. I felt very supported in that community. But I think that's an exception rather than the norm. I think a lot of people out there would feel that they had to just tell a white lie rather than be honest and say, hey, look, I'm fallible. I'm sick. I need to look after myself today. And I think that's really where we need to get to with everything, with every system, with every corporation. We need to get to a point where workers and people that uphold these institutions can put themselves first. Yeah. I think it's so important.
1,000,000%. It's why I think I will always feel the call to support young moms. Like, I just think if that's not where it starts to, you have to do it all, actually, honey, because we expect it of you. Well, do we? Are we supposed to? Is that necessarily supportive long-term for the health of the women in our lives? I don't know. No. I mean, it also, I say this from a complete awareness of my privilege that I'm able to work from home. I'm able to have flexibility in my life, but I have also worked at prioritizing that because I see the need for that as a mom, as a caretaker of my elders, as well as one of the people who plays a role in caretaking for the elders in our circle. Like, why are we here? Why are humans here? Are we not here to look after each other? I think that's our primary role. So when histamine shows up, it's a call that I think the person for whom it's showing up needs support. And where can we build those pieces of support? Yeah. I mean, that's a huge, big picture. Yeah. I'd love to do it in my lifetime. Anyway, no small feat. But histamine, especially when you start to figure it out. And the reason it shows up and really ramps up in those perimenopausal years is because of that hormonal piece to the picture and the shifting that's going on as well. So it's one of those helpers and reminders. Hi, Sugar, did you take care of yourself today? And self-care right now is showing up as aftercare. You know what I mean? The way that the health and wellness industry talks about this is you need to put yourself first. You need to self-care. You know what you need actually? Self-care right now is aftercare. We waited too long. We actually need community care. We need community care. And that starts by making small decisions for yourself and requesting others to step up with you. And I think that's one of the ways forward.
Yeah. And you talk about being, your kitchen being your number one ally. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. I've heard of kitchen therapy before, and I love this idea. And I think the kitchen has a potential to be a space for community where we create. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. I never thought of it as a place of community. But yeah, how doesn't it, right? I mean, when you have gatherings, when you have funerals, when you have births, when you have weddings, it is a cultural celebration of humans, and there's always food involved somehow, somewhere. When someone's sick, do you not bring over some soup? When someone just had a baby, do you not bring over roast chicken dinner, like to nourish them? When mums on my block have babies, I bring a bunch of muffins and some tasty snacks so they can have something at the ready, so that when my friend drives me to the airport, I give her chocolate and hot chocolate, like, those kinds of pieces where we look after each other. I think that kitchen in that sense also brings the community together. When I wrote Make Your Kitchen Your Number One Ally, I was really thinking about how you feed yourself has the potential of supporting your own health and maximizing how well your body can keep you well. Because really, ultimately, at the end of the day, your body wants to keep you well. So when she sends smoke signals saying something's up, I'm sending you a little love note, something's up and I need help over here, then we need to listen to those messages. And I think histamine-mediated symptoms are just love notes. I know it's hard because when we first get those symptoms, like when my eczema and my migraines were around, or my terrible periods, like I would have 5 or 6 days of the month due to different things where I wouldn't be able to participate in life. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, my body lets me down all the time. Well, that doesn't help the stress response. It makes me be responsible for all of it. There's another way to be responsible for it, is to shift a bit how we think of caring for ourselves, for our families, how we request help from others, asking what we need, and putting those dietary pieces in place, not just low histamine. Like, full disclosure, I actually don't eat low histamine, and I have histamine issues. I really think that histamine diet piece is a really good helper when the symptoms are up and alive and on fire, it feels like.
Yeah.
But as you calm what's contributing to that, the goal is eventually to bring in as much diversity and variety as you can in terms of the foods you're eating, because that's actually what supports ultimate health everywhere. And doing it and figuring out which foods work for you, which ones don't. Isn't it the same in a community level? Like, it's kind of like the foods that you eat can be a way to reflect what's happening in the outside world. So I think there's a lot to be said about knitting together the food piece with the community piece and the being human. I don't know.
I love that. I love all of that sort of stream of consciousness that you just did there. And I love this idea that our symptoms are actually our friends, and they're little love notes from your body saying, hey, let's just have a check-in, and let's just maybe, because I'm like that now. I don't do sort of strict dieting, or I don't do this staunch healthy regime. I listen to my body, and I think when you've done that for a long time, I think it's possible to eat very intuitively. Like, my body tells me what I want. Right now, I'm not eating a huge volume of food. I don't feel that my body wants a huge volume of food, and my digestion actually can't handle a huge volume of food. So I'm eating much smaller meals, and actually not a huge amount of vegetables at the moment either. I seem to actually want more meat and things like sweet potato and root vegetables and things like that. I'll probably get back on the plants at some point, but it's like I have the energy that I need right now, and I feel that that's okay, you know.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. Yeah. And how to, there's another piece to think about this. When you move through the seasons, think of how your ancestors would have moved through the seasons. They wouldn't have been eating kale in the month of February. They wouldn't, well, or maybe they did depending where you live, but certainly not where I am. Like, you can't grow kale in February. You wouldn't have been eating salad in the month of March, but bring on the salads in July. Absolutely. And further to that, how did our genetics not evolve with that way of eating? And we just shifted everything 100 years ago. How is that not potential? Is it maybe? I think it has a part to play in how well we're moving through our days. This certain time of year, we're recording this in the early spring. This is not when you would have had fresh vegetables at the ready, not where I am. So how is that also not a part of intuitive eating that is also a part of how we best support the body?
Yeah, and the community as well. It's all, you know, we're one big ecosystem, really, aren't we? You can't separate the Earth's ecosystem from our own body ecosystem. And you can even zoom out further, and I'm sure there's like universal ecosystems or planetary systems. And I'm getting big here, but for me, it seems like we are all connected in some way.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think as we do things for ourselves and supporting our own health, how is that not also benefiting our environment and our planet and all of the planets and all of the people in our circles?
Yeah.
No one's in isolation. No one's in a corner by themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Just checking the time and also some of the other juicy things that you can talk about. You've spoken about 3 tips on how, you haven't spoken about this. Can you share 3 tips on how to get started if you have histamine? And so shall we just do a quick check-in what actually is histamine intolerance?
Yeah, so histamine intolerance, it's a misnomer. They didn't name it properly. It's an inability to move out spent histamine. Okay. So it's that you have more histamine coming in faster than you can move out. So there's an analogy for the bucket out there, but we like to use the sink because it makes it a little bit more clear. So a sink, if you have a sink, everybody has a certain capacity of how much water their sink can hold, and everybody's sink is different. So there's a plug at the bottom and there's a tap at the top. How much is your tap on all the time? Is it on full blast? Can you even turn it off? Is it trickling all the time? Does the plug at the bottom work? Is it gummed up? And can it drain properly, or is it draining really slowly? When your sink fills up and overflows, that's when the symptoms show up. Okay. So when the migraines show up, when your painful cramps show up, when the insomnia shows up, if it's histamine mediated, that's your sink overflowing. What over the course of the day has contributed to the tap being on? Can we do something to turn the tap down or low or off? And how can we work to improve the sink at the bottom, the draining? So first things first, replacing those high histamine foods actually helps to slow down how much water is coming into your sink. And histamine intolerance versus mast cell, histamine intolerance is more so an inability to make that DAO enzyme at the gut level. Okay. Whereas mast cell activation is something where your mast cells are feeling they need less stimulus to release different compounds. So you tend to be the people who react to perfumes or to sunlight or to, I used to react to blinds. Like when there were blinds in a bright window, the black and white of lights was just too much for my brain and would trigger a migraine. So that's where you need to start wondering if there's a mast cell involvement. And I don't diagnose. I won't ever. I don't need a diagnosis either. I know that when I do some of these pieces for me, it helps reduce my symptoms. So reducing those high histamine foods. So probably the biggest hitters are for sure avocado, tomato, bone broth, and fermented foods. But other ones that you think are healthy, like pineapple or citrus fruits. And everybody who's on a keto bandwagon right now, bacon, God's sake, so high histamine. Smoked salmon, walnuts are probably the highest histamine nut. So if these are a regular occurrence in your day-to-day diet, then these are some to remove in order to stop the trickle coming into the sink. So that's the first one. The second one, eat as fresh as you can. The reason is the more food is around from when it's alive to when you're consuming, the more histamine develops. Also, the higher on the food chain, the faster the histamine develops. So, for example, a steak will have more histamine than an avocado that is high histamine, but is a fruit. So beef has to be hung in Canada. It's usually hung anywhere from 28 to 36 days, somewhere in that range. And over that hang time, it makes it so you can actually cut into the steak. And it makes it palatable. You're able to actually cut into it. Otherwise, it's too tough. In that time, though, as you can appreciate, there's a lot of histamine that develops. Same thing with fish. If a fish is 4 days from being caught, there's way more histamine than when you go pick it up off of the fishmonger right on the docks. So eat as fresh as you can. When you're buying any type of seafood like fish or seafood, if you can source it from somebody who's freezing right as they land on the pier, that's the best way to do it. So community supported fisheries is one of the ways to look after that. Eating as fresh as you can. And, if you go to the store on Monday and there's chicken that's on for 30% off because tomorrow is the due date, but there's another packet of chicken that's not due until Friday, pick up the chicken that's due on Friday. Cook it that day or put it in the freezer right away. When you put stuff in the freezer, it reduces the histamine development. So picking as fresh as you can, and then freezing is the third one. So when you make a big batch of soup, for example, on Monday night, a lovely chicken butternut stew of some sort. If you're making it Monday night and you're having it for lunch on Tuesday, most people will be okay to just put it in the fridge and reheat tomorrow. But if you're making it Monday and you're going to eat it Friday, put it in individually sized containers into the freezer. Into the freezer goes because that's where histamine slows down development. So as much as you can, freeze your leftovers. And that's where at Histamine Haven, we do some work to help you develop that batch prep idea, where you make a big batch prep of something, then you freeze in individual sized containers into the freezer so it's easy to defrost. So replace the high histamine foods, eat as fresh as you can, and freeze your leftovers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant tips. And we've spoken about it's not always necessary to do a low histamine diet all of the time, but if you're having a symptom flare up, do a low histamine diet, for a week or a month? What do you recommend?
It depends on the person. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. Going low histamine will, if it resolves all your symptoms within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then it's most probably histamine intolerance. And at that point, while you're doing the low histamine protocol, you have to do the foods that do the mending as well. So as they do the mending of the gut lining, then you improve your ability to make that important enzyme. As you do some work to build the microbiome, and that is sometimes through probiotics. Some people cannot tolerate probiotics. So it's a very individual approach. You need to figure out what works. Eat that are prebiotics that enhance really good populations of bacteria. So depending on the person, you do those two pieces of looking after the microbiome, doing some gut repair, and keeping low histamine. After 3 or 4 weeks, if you start introducing higher histamine foods, that then is how you know that it's either potentially a mast cell piece or if there's that histamine piece. So at that point, that's where reintroducing some of the higher histamine foods is important. And it's important to do that too, because if you go low histamine too long, you have the potential of having nutrient deficiencies. For example, I use this always, beef liver or chicken liver, any kind of liver actually. Liver has that right balance of nutrients you need to make DAO enzyme. But liver happens to be high histamine. Oh, wait a second, I'm supposed to go low histamine, so I won't eat liver. Wait a second, but that food helps you better break down histamines. So why are you taking it out? Oh, take it out in the early stages when the symptoms are up. Let's do repair, and then let's bring in that liver so you can start to bring in those nutrients so your body can have the ingredients to make the enzymes to deal with the issue at hand. So that's why a low histamine approach is not necessarily the only tool. Starting to selectively bring in some of those higher histamine foods is a part of that success route, I think, just to make sure that you're getting all the nutrients you need to do the work that your body wants to do.
It's really quite complex, isn't it? And I wouldn't want to do this on my own. If I was going to really tackle this, I would definitely want to work with somebody like you who has all of this knowledge and has seen these things happening before and can go, oh, wait, this is happening. We need to let's do a U-turn or backtrack.
Yeah. And that's the benefit of having that's what we're hoping to build with Histamine Haven. We're self-publishing a book. We waited a year and a half for publishers to chomp at the bit and nobody did. So forget it. We're going to do it ourselves. We have a comprehensive guide and cookbook that we've put together. So we're just in the finishing stages of that self-publishing journey. So hopefully that will be out sometime summer of 2022. So if people wanted to do this by themselves, they can pour through lots of the science and the methodology of why. And then there's 140 recipes afterwards. And we talk about the 3 stages of when and how to go low histamine, when to start introducing, and how to know, do you personally have other compounds in foods that are contributing to your issues, how to move through that, like salicylates or oxalates or FODMAPs or sulfur foods, or, the list goes on. There's always going to be something. And that's why every person who has a histamine issue, it's different from one person to the next. I like to say, if I have migraines and my neighbor Mandy has migraines, mine could be because of my adrenals. Hers could be because of her liver. We both have the same symptoms, but the work that needs to happen to reduce what's contributing to the migraines is different. Yeah. So that's why it's so hard from one person to the next. And the histamine thing tends to move around the body. It doesn't stay in one area either. Fun times.
Just to add insult to injury.
Right? Oh, thanks, Lottie.
I know. Thank you. Right, let's finish off on, there's still some more things I want to ask you if we've got time, but what are 3 nutrients to reach for in order to help if the situation has got out of hand? And there's three great nutrients. So one of them we talked about was DAO. So that DAO enzyme is in those pea shoots. So bringing in pea shoots and seeing if you can tolerate them. That's a really nice, easy food way to just support that piece at the meal itself. It helps to reduce the histamine coming in. So as you can imagine, that DAO enzyme actually even stops the water from coming into the sink in the first place. So that's one of the tips. It also occurs in some other foods, like most fresh herbs will have a small amount of DAO. So that's a good little tip, just to mince a bunch of herbs on whatever meal you're having, a dusting of parsley, or adding cilantro, or making a chimichurri or a pesto, or some type of green herby sauce of some sort to be worked into the meal you're having. That's a really nice way to include that. In some people will tolerate kidney, others won't. Kidney is an organ meat, and as an animal source of protein, it has the potential of being higher histamine. But for some people, it's a balance, always a balancing act, right? There's naturally occurring DAO enzyme in kidneys. Mm-hmm. So if you eat your steak and kidney pie and it helps reduce your symptoms, fantastic. If it doesn't, it's not necessarily the kidneys. It could be something else in the kidney pie, steak and kidney pie, that could be contributing. But so kidney has to be something you can play with and see if it's okay for you. So that's the first one, is the DAO naturally occurring in foods. The next one, there's a nutrient called quercetin. And you can think of quercetin as a vitamin, essentially. So quercetin, it's in a lot of foods. Some of those foods happen to be high histamine, but I have a really good list of low histamine quercetin-rich foods. And this would be, blueberries, apples, onions, cabbage, asparagus, kale, radicchio, cilantro, fresh dill. So even just the simple act, fresh dill will have that DAO, will also have quercetin. So that's a nice little easy piece to add to your meals. All of these, by the way, are listed on our Histamine Haven shopping list, which everybody can access. It's a downloadable right from our website under resources. So it's easy to find. On there, you'll also find some vitamin C foods. Vitamin C itself is actually an antihistamine. Oh. It has the potential of quieting the system so you're not releasing histamine as much. So, but vitamin C foods, some of them are really high histamine, like citrus. So citrus doesn't fit the bill here, but vitamin C as a supplement, depending on the route and how the supplement was made, can help histamine issues or make them worse. So if you currently take a vitamin C supplement, gauge to see, are your reactions worse when you take it? If you take it out for 3 days, do your symptoms improve? Maybe that's something to move out.
But in terms of foods, vitamin C foods that happen to be low histamine, blackberries, cherries, cranberries. Cantaloupe is really easy to have on hand and just chop and munch. Cabbage again, broccoli, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, parsley, and pomegranate seeds. These are all really great additions of vitamin C. So they're the low histamine version of some of those plant foods. So vitamin C foods, quercetin, and DAO enzyme. And again, all of these are listed on the Histamine Haven shopping list. That shopping list that's on our website is for the first stage. So that has the lowest histamine foods. It has those foods that have those nutrients that help stabilize your mast cells so that they're not releasing histamine as much. It also is low in some of those other compounds that potentially drive your mast cells to release histamine, which is a 75-hour conversation.
I think your website is just full of so many brilliant resources, and I think the book is just going to fly off the shelves. I think it's going to be amazing. One question that sprung to mind: why don't we just take an antihistamine tablet?
I think it's going to help your symptoms on that day. Right on. Great. Oh, do you know that it actually further hinders the naturally occurring processes in the body to do the work of deactivating histamines and moving them out? Okay. So I love, there are some people who will need histamine no, what are they called? Give me one second. They help reduce the release of certain, I'm trying to think of what the word is. I can never remember. There are histamine inhibitors. They inhibit your mast cells from releasing histamine. There's H1 receptors, H2, there's 4 different kinds of histamine receptors, and there are receptor inhibitors. So they inhibit your own body from releasing histamine. And I have to be honest, I really think in this day and age, for many people, especially if there's a mast cell piece to the picture, medication can be one of those ways that we calm your mast cells down. Yeah. So my colleague actually very openly talks about how she relies on 2 to help reduce how much her mast cells are releasing histamine. And there's nothing wrong with that either, because I think that's one of those steps that can help us feel better. How are you supposed to just take the hit and still go through the day anyway? No, it's okay to start looking after things and reducing what's contributing to the symptoms. But in conjunction with those medications, doing a little bit of a lower histamine approach and supporting the body to address what's at the root of why she doesn't feel safe will also help reduce your need to rely on medication. So why not do all of it? And we are big supporters of a multi-pronged approach. It cannot just be one thing. It is many different pieces. And at the end of the day, it has to be done with joy, because if it's a slog and it's a stressor, you're undoing what we're trying to do. Stress is probably the biggest driver of this. So whatever you can do to say, bless it and get on with it will actually help you. Yeah. So wherever each person is individual, and you get to decide what other pieces you're going to put in place for yourself.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I love this synergy between, taking medication if you need to, and it's not an either or scenario, it's both. And like you say, I think medication just takes that edge off so that you can function, so that you can go to the supermarket, get the foods that you need to get, so you can actually think. Because if your nose is streaming or you're itching all over or you're on the toilet, you can't do anything. You're no good to anyone. So, calm those symptoms down first, but also recognize that there is more work to be done under the surface, and you have to take that personal responsibility for your stress levels, for your diet and sleep and other things as well.
Yeah, it's really an invitation to get to know yourself a little bit better, and to get in touch with what it is to be you and what makes your body function. I think histamines are a brilliant way to help us bring us back into our bodies. I think it is a certain way, I think we live in an age where we're all in our heads and we're all online, and we are starting to put ourselves out and we're less grounded. How is histamine not part of that balancing act of trying to get us back into our bodies, trying to reintegrate ourselves into the natural world? I really think it is. Yeah. And I see it as this brilliant, loving intention that my body's sending out to say, don't forget, you're part of nature. Come back. Like, go do your work, but come back.
That's such a beautiful way to end this podcast episode and this conversation. I have absolutely loved, listening to you, really. You're so knowledgeable, you're so wise, you're so articulate, and you encompass everything. You're not just laser focused in one direction. You step back, you zoom out, and you look at the whole picture as well, which I really love. And we've been lucky to have you on this podcast. So your website is brilliant, and I recommend that everyone go check it out. There's some phenomenal resources on there. I'll put all of your links in the show notes, of course, so people can check you out. I'm just having a look, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you've got some YouTube videos as well, and of course your website, and the book will be out soon.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, you're so welcome.
I could talk about histamines all day long and how to human, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. How can we have a better experience moving through this one precious life, as Mary Oliver says? Yeah. Thank you for having me. And thank you for giving me a chance to talk about histamines too. Because I think, especially as you're moving through perimenopause and into menopause, it does start to show up. And for some people, it is that invitation and the turning on of the light in a room that you didn't realize the light wasn't even on.
So I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Luka. And I hope that you are feeling a little bit more knowledgeable, and especially perhaps have connected some of the dots about where histamine might be playing havoc in your life and what you can potentially do about it. So just one announcement then before we finish. In case you weren't aware, I have launched my brand new mini course called How to Create Phenomenal Self-Esteem. And the reason I created this is because when we don't have high self-esteem, often what we do is we dim our light just so that we can remain relatable and connected to others. But that has the effect of being so inwardly painful to our soul that we just feel like we start to wither. And on the contrary, when we have high self-esteem, we like ourselves. We don't mind upsetting the apple cart. We have to live authentically, and that feels much kinder and much nicer to our souls. And we also behave in a way that enables us to be kinder to our bodies, to get what we want, and we actually gain more respect from the people around us. And so that improves relationships. So what are you going to get inside this mini course? Well, for just £47, you'll receive 3 things. The first thing is you'll get my high self-esteem strategy. This is a 2-part, 6-step strategy delivered to your inbox over 2 weeks. And this comprises of the conscious pathway that you can follow for the rest of your life to help you turn low self-esteem around. It's simple, it's effective, and actually it's really enjoyable. Next, you're going to get my Soaring Self-Esteem Hypnosis recording, because without tapping into the power of the subconscious mind, change rarely occurs. And so that's why I've included this super powerful hypnosis recording for you to listen to for 30 days alongside following the high self-esteem strategy. Then thirdly, you're going to get a one-to-one support session with me. And this is because I know that you are not a robot and you need nuanced support. Now, not many online courses give you access to one-to-one help, but I do, because I understand the need for this. I understand the power that you get from being validated and the power that you get from being held accountable. So when you get this mini course, you get the high self-esteem strategy, you get the Soaring Self-Esteem Hypnosis recording, and you get a 30-minute one-to-one support session with me, all for just £47. You've got the course material for life. There's no time limit on it, so you can come back to it time and time again. So if you want to gain access right now and start increasing and improving your self-esteem, and maybe even start seeing some of the effects of that this week, then head on over to sallygarozzo.com/self-esteem, and I'll see you inside. So remember, if you're liking these podcasts and you really believe in getting the word out there about menopause health, then please subscribe and leave a review too. It just means that we get to reach out to more people who need to hear this message, and happy people means a happy world. Your interaction might very well help to save another person's sanity. All right, folks, I'll see you next week. Bye for now.